This review is going to be a quick recap of the French Revolution. During the 16th and 17th centuries, France really is going to be the most powerful empire and kingdom in Europe. And the thing is, through this time, the French people really are going to kind of start to look at their government in a very new way, especially with the influence of the Enlightenment thinkers who were writing during the time period. And what's going to happen is they are going to completely overthrow the monarchy in France, which becomes known as the French Revolution, and they are going to establish a series of new governments trying to effectively get it right. Just to kind of re-talk about some of the context here, the causes of the French Revolution are mostly going to be driven by a number of different things, right? So for starters, you have the ideas of the Enlightenment, right? You have Locke, who's opposing absolutism and that government should protect the natural rights of the people. You have Montesquieu calling for the separation of powers. You also have economic reasons. Issues that are going on in France. In particular, you have poverty and food shortages. You have heavy taxation on the poor, and then effectively, with that heavy taxation, you're going to get some serious economic inequality of the French society between the regular people and the nobles. You also have some French participation in the American Revolution. You have a man named Marquis de Lafayette, who worked very closely with George Washington relatively early on in the war. And then you are also going to have the French back the United States, and they're going to create a blockade of the English Navy at Hampton Roads and the Battle of Yorktown as well, with French troops fighting there. So this fervor for revolution is going to be kind of brought back by a number of the men who are returning from the American Revolution to France. To provide some context, of the lead up to the storming of the Bastille in 1789, I just want to kind of talk about quickly, basically a meeting of what was known as the Estates General. It was going to be called in early May of 1789, an attempt to deal with some of these issues, especially the economic issues we had just talked about going on in France. So in this Estates General, you are going to have three different estates, right? You have the first estate, which is represented by the clergy, the second estate, which is represented by the nobility, and lastly the third estate, which is meant to kind of represent the commoners. And they start meeting, and really the clergy and the nobility have a similar amount of people as the third estate in this representation here, and even though they are a significantly smaller percentage of the population. And when the third estate feels that their representation isn't effectively being taken seriously, they are going to leave, and they are going to found what they call the communes, or just simply commons. And then really over the course of a couple weeks and a number of failures at negotiations between these different parties, the commons are going to kind of gradually pick up more support of some of the nobility and clergy and began calling themselves the National Assembly. And this National Assembly is going to pass a constitution and have different ideas of how to run a government. And when you start to get this kind of ideas going on, you're going to now have weeks of squabbling between this National Assembly and King Louis XVI over this power. And Louis XVI is going to actually place troops in Paris, and then also the removal of his finance minister, a man named Jacques Necker, who had actually been seen as sympathetic to the Commons, is going to lead now and be the precursor towards the storming of the Bastille, which is going to be seen as the beginning of the French Revolution. So the storming of the Bastille happens on July 14th, 1789, and the Bastille had kind of been a political prison, and it was seen as this source of power and a symbol for power of the king and the monarchy. And when you have the men storm it and basically break into the Bastille, it's going to be seen as this symbolic, beginning of the end for the monarchy in France, and these people are going to kind of rip the Bastille down brick by brick, in a show of force and a show of resolve to kind of to move beyond the issues that they had been having in France. And in France, July 14th is going to be seen very similarly to the 4th of July here in America. So here are just some paintings of the Bastille that I think you guys can look at. This is a storming the Bastille. And this is kind of taking and destroying the Bastille and ripping it down brick by brick, as I had mentioned. So now, for a little more context, as revolutionary spirit heated up, a few months after the storming of Bastille, you're going to get the Women's March on Versailles over issues of hunger, shortages of bread, and rumors, really, that grain was being hoarded at Versailles. So these women's actions actually forced King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette to move their quarters to Paris so that they could be more directly watched by the revolutionaries. So war is actually going to break out between France and Prussia and Austria, really in an attempt to kind of contain the revolution and restore the monarchy. Marie Antoinette was from Austria, and you're also going to get an attempt by Louis and Marie Antoinette to actually flee the country, to escape into Austria where Marie was from. And these two are eventually going to be beheaded in the revolutionary fervor, and this is a pretty incredibly huge deal, right? The execution of the former king is pretty serious. So continuing on, right, after a series of attempts at government, we're going to get the French First Republic with the establishment of what's known as the National Convention in 1792. They're going to try to draw on the ideas of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, of the Citizen, which had been passed by that National Constituent Assembly not long after the Estates General breaks up. And discontent's going to actively grow against the National Convention's handling of France when you're going to get similar issues of famine continue and food riots and things like that. And as a means of trying to protect themselves, the National Convention is going to create what is known as the Committee of Public Safety, which is going to ultimately be headed by a man named Maximilien Robespierre to deal with any external and also internal threats against the French First Republic. This idea of dealing with these potential threats is going to lead to what is known as the Reign of Terror, where you are going to have thousands of enemies, kind of quote unquote, of the revolution being executed between June 1793 and July 1794, and many of these are going to actively take place in Paris. And just to kind of exhibit how crazy this period gets is that really we're between internal power struggles of this Committee of Public Safety. Eventually Robespierre himself is going to be arrested and also executed by Guillotine himself. So if you don't know what a guillotine is this this structure that has this kind of blade on an angle that is released and the person is beheaded. It's meant to be a very rapid and quick means of death and very clean and also equal. Everyone dies in an equal way, right? And this is kind of to change up how they used to have executioners with these axes that might take a number of whacks to effectively get through someone's neck before they were beheaded. So this is kind of meant to kind of level the playing field of everyone who is going to be executed by this method. Here's just another picture of an execution, or after an execution, really. So just to kind of reiterate and recap some of the outcomes of the French Revolution, you're going to have the execution of Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, and it's going to lead to the end of an absolute monarchy in France. There's going to be war breaking out with the neighboring countries, especially Austria and Prussia, who are going to kind of fear the revolution, and they're going to fear that the revolutionary ideas are going to spread to them as well. And through all of it, you're going to actually get the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who is going to be a strong figure that's going to come out of all of this and, in an attempt to kind of bring order out of the chaos.